welcome back to the Coffee Breath Podcast. My name is Taylor, and first of all, I just want to thank you for coming to hang out with me today. Hope that you are doing well. And not only do I have coffee breath, literal coffee breath, but I also have a twitching, spasming left eye. It's probably due to stress, probably due to, the fact that there's fucking multiple types of pandemics going on in the world right now, and everything's on fire and everyone's against one another, and it keeps me up at night. But then also I've just been having crazy, insane nightmares, like wild, vivid, feeling so real, like almost like a virtual reality. Like you can feel it, you're experiencing it, like you can, I don't know, you can like smell, like I still remember, all I remember from last night's dream was it was like storming in a city, and I could smell like whatever that smell is, but like a storm, and I was in a city, and it felt so real. And maybe sometimes dreams are an alternate reality, or like an Avatar kind of thing. Like we fall asleep in this world, and when we drift off, and then we're off into another world. Who knows? That's a topic for a whole other podcast. Definitely not today's topic. So today's episode might be a little bit long. I'm going to do my best. My camera only records for 30 minutes, and then I'll have to change the SD card. So I'm going to try to keep this, around that amount of time. Definitely under an hour, but this is going to be a jam-packed episode, and it's breathtaking. You see what I did there? So today's topic, if you don't follow me on social media, you should, linked in the description. But I've been talking about this book called Breath. Of course, I found out about it on the Joe Rogan podcast. It's fascinating. It's a book by James Nestor. It's The New Science of a Lost Art. It's just fascinating, and it's all backed by science and research and data. Give me a comment and let me know what it is. But no, it's fascinating. And so I watched the podcast, listened to it, and that was 3 hours of just, ooh, there she goes. The eyes, she's switching. But it was just a fascinating interview, great interview, a very down-to-earth guy. He actually he DM'd me back on social media because I shouted him out, and I was like, oh, that's awesome. Like you don't get that a lot from, I'm not saying like he's a celebrity per se, he's an author, he's a journalist, a writer, but it feels good how social media can be of good. Like we can reach out to the actual author of a book. Back before social media, how would you do that? You'd have to like reach out to, go into the inside, find the publisher, reach out maybe to the publisher or the book company or something like that. So that was really cool. That made me feel good. But yeah, so getting into the book, it's literally mind-blowing. And I know you're like, okay, well, you keep talking about how mind-blowing it is, but what the fuck is it about? Okay, settle down, take a seat, take some deep breaths, and I'll let you know. So this is the most basic yet essential human function, which is breathing. And I didn't know that I was breathing wrong for so many years. For pretty much my whole life, until like I still have breathing issues to this day, which I'm working on. But I really didn't learn how to properly breathe until I was in my early 20s. I know that's still like young, but imagine going like 20 something, like 22 years without knowing how to breathe properly. like I probably lost a lot of brain cells that way, and that would explain for why I didn't do so well in school. That my attention span, but he gets into that, like ADHD and sleep apnea, asthma, diabetes is all, could be health consequences if you're not breathing properly. And I know you're probably like, oh, is this some, Californian new age hippie voodoo kind of stuff? It's like, no, this is all backed by science in the modern day science, but then it's also backed by like ancient science, and we'll get into that. But yeah, from like the day that I can I even have a memory, what that's probably like 3 or 5. I don't know. When do you start remembering shit? Because I don't have a great memory anymore. Probably because I'm not breathing right. And he talks about that. But yeah, I didn't breathe right. But there's no books, no like soon to be parents or expecting parents books on how to teach your child how to breathe properly. You just want to make sure that you're going to be feeding them right and being attentive to them when they need you and stuff like that. You don't think like, that's an involuntary action is breathing. It turns out it is, but it can be voluntary as well. Yeah, so my whole life I have experienced shortness of breath, and I've had a lot of panic attacks. If you have never experienced a panic attack before, then like bravo, because I wouldn't wish them on my worst enemy. They're some of the scariest experiences I've had. I mean, and that's personal to me. Everyone experiences everything differently. But it's this feeling to me like I'm drowning, but I'm on land, and I'm gasping for air, but I'm also like literally and physically grasping for air, and yet I still can't breathe. And now that I'm older and I'm wiser with, like myself, like how I function as Taylor, as myself, but then also on the subject, I experienced panic attacks, but also asthma attacks. Sometimes I didn't know which one it was, but then also sometimes like one would trigger the other. If I was having an asthma attack, feeling like I can't breathe because maybe my airways are struggling and my lungs are struggling, then that feeling of like, oh my God, I'm drowning on land would trigger me to have a panic attack. But then also I've had panic attacks that maybe they were a little bit worse because I have asthma attacks. I don't know. It's probably, everything's connected, everything's intertwined. But I remember this one time so clearly, and you'll see why I fucking remember it. I wish that my brain would just, do one of those things where it takes the file, puts it away into a little filing cabinet, locks it, and then locks that room, and then like locks that building, and then takes all the keys and like melts it down, and then tosses like a ring like Lord of the Rings out into a molten lava, and then you can't get back in there. I wish that sometimes my brain would do that with some of these memories. And then and they have. And then sometimes I'm laying awake at night, and then all of a sudden a memory from like 10 years ago comes flooding in, and I'm like, oh shit, when the fuck, wait, when did that happen? Oh no, oh, why am I remembering this right now? One of those kind of things. But this one time I was fighting with my like first real boyfriend, like your high school boyfriend, not your boyfriend in like kindergarten or first grade where, you guys just hang out all the time and everyone's like, oh, it's so cute. This was like my first like real boyfriend, and oh my God, what a fucking loser. And I can say that without being a total fucking bitch, only because, let me tell you, this guy was a piece of shit. He would literally, I don't know why, obviously because he has issues and hurt people, But he would like tell me how to dress. He would tell me how to like walk and talk. And I remember him telling me like, oh, you can't get your hair cut like that because then you'll look like a lesbian. I'm like, what the fuck does that mean? On multiple like levels. What does that mean? But that, that's another story for another time of why I let people walk all over me and treat me like shit. Ooh, but let me tell you, that can't happen anymore. But yeah, he was mentally and emotionally very abusive. But I got so stressed out when we were in a fight. I got all worked up, and I'm like starting to relive it. Okay. That feeling of like panic in your chest, and then you start to breathe a little quicker. See, it's happening right now. Okay, so deep breaths. But yeah, I got so worked up, so stressed out, and I had a really bad panic attack. I think it was like my first one that like I knew what was happening, or no, that I didn't really know what was happening. It was the first like huge panic attack, not just a little like, and then I can calm down. This was like straight into intense hyperventilation to the point where I was losing the feeling in the tips of my fingers and my toes, and you get this sense of like ants crawling underneath your skin, and you can almost feel like it's almost like being super high. You can almost feel like every single cell in your body like vibrating. And my eyes rolled into the back of my head. I remember my mom was freaking out, and of course, she did what she had to do, and what I would do if I was a parent as well. When I'm seeing my child go through something like that, she called 911. And what happens when you call 911? Everybody comes to the rescue, which is a good thing. Don't get me wrong. That's a great thing. But an embarrassing thing for a 15 or 16-year-old girl who is crying hysterically, snot, like an ugly, horrific kind of crying. That's like definitely not like, they don't even show that kind of crying in like movies. Yeah, it's a nasty sight. And then my mom has to explain, because I can't talk, I can't do anything. I feel like I'm dying in this moment. I'm like, what the fuck is happening to me? And my mom has to explain, well, she's fighting with her I don't know if she said that, but I just look back and I'm like, oh shit, that's so embarrassing. So embarrassing. Well, no, now that I look back, it's not as embarrassing, because I was going through something, and I shouldn't be so hard on myself. But back then, as a teenage girl, having all these like policemen and firefighters and EMTs around me, I'm like, and then it's all because I can't breathe because I'm freaking out because I'm fighting with a jerk. Yeah, that's kind of embarrassing. And also, ambulances are fucking expensive. I feel bad for my parents. I am so sorry. So sorry. But, you have to do what you have to do in the moment. And we also had insurance or something, so I'm sure that it played out fine. But also, I'm so sorry, Mom and Dad. But I did, so I'm in the ambulance. I still can't breathe. I kind of remember them just kind of being like, okay, like take deep breaths. Like they put a blanket on me. They're taking my vitals and stuff. And they're just kind of like, just try your best to relax. Like being very kind about it. But also, and I understand that they were doing their best, because what do you do? The most you could do is like sedate me to make me shut up and make me calm down. But when someone's freaking out, telling them to relax is like, it's like throwing an eyedropper. It's like you have this bonfire or like this fire, right? And it's a decent sized fire and you're trying to put it out, but you have like an eyedropper and you're just like, boop. That's what telling someone to relax when they're freaking out. It doesn't really do anything. But again, they were just trying to do the best that they could. I get it. But then I went to the ER. Like, why? That's so, again, not really needed. I don't know why, but I think when an ambulance comes, they have to take you. Otherwise, it's some kind of like liability thing. I could be wrong. I don't know. I try not to travel in ambulances too often. But yeah, so that was embarrassing. But anywho, improper breathing led my body to become like constantly in this fight or flight mode, and I believe that my body became like addicted to cortisol when I was younger, because it was just this continuous cycle. And then you're creating ways in order, your body is, becomes addicted to this hormone and this chemical in your body. And then it kind of seeks out, because it needs more, it seeks out experiences to, to get that. If that makes any sense. Does that make any sense? But yeah, there were days when I would have panic attacks multiple times a day, always feeling like, I'm like dying. And, I'm not saying like, oh, all of this is due to just because I was breathing improperly. No, I know that I was having panic attacks because I was suffering and still suffering to this day of like PTSD and a lot of other issues. But now that I think about it, what if back then, if I did know how to breathe properly, maybe the panic attacks wouldn't have been so bad, or maybe they wouldn't have been at all. I don't know. That's something to talk to a therapist about. And when I find a good therapist, I shall do so. But I didn't learn to breathe. Oh, here I am knocking the microphone around. I didn't learn to breathe from my diaphragm until I started practicing yoga, and that, like yoga and meditation. And that was when I was, like in my first class was when I was 16, like 15, 16, because I was dating that asshole. And because of all of that, my mom was like, you're going to go learn how to calm the fuck down and de-stress and like chill out. But, especially when you're a teenager and yoga wasn't popular back then, it wasn't as like trendy as it is now. You were still kind of looked at as like, is she a witch? Does she practice magic? Like you were looked at as like an outsider if you practiced yoga back then. But then, I did, and I didn't do yoga back then consistently. But then when I turned like 18s into my like young 20s, I got into yoga, and then I did a yoga teacher training, and that's when I learned how to breathe more properly, like through my diaphragm. And so that's like breathing from your belly, like feeling it rise and fall and expand outwards from like all sides. And that's how you absorb most of the oxygen. But for me, what I was doing was I was breathing like in my upper chest and breathing like up and down, or even like reverse breathing, where when I was exhaling, my stomach or like just everything, like my torso would expand when it should contract. And when I was inhaling, everything would contract when I was supposed to be expanding. So everything was just fucked up, right? But those like up and down breaths right here in your upper chest, that is shallow and like short breathing, which then causes stress on your body, which then your body's like, shit, baby, we're in fight or flight mode now. Like, let's go. Like, let's do this. And that's not a great way to live. And the more stressed out and the more cortisol that is flooding your system, it ages you. So if you want to do some anti-aging, if you're one of those, and you want to do something for free, learn how to breathe properly. Or maybe not free. Maybe spend the I don't know, 15 to 20 bucks that this book would cost, and then you can learn how to breathe through there. So let's actually get into that. Gotta look at my notes. But this is a quote from the book. There are so many different ways to breathe as there are foods to eat. Who would have thought? Who would have known? Actually, let's take a break here. I'm going to change the SD card, and then we will get into the book. So stay tuned, and I will see you back in just a moment. All right. Okay, so I'm back, and I've got my notes. So I'm just going to give you the little reading of the inside of the cover. just to get you enticed a little bit more. So first I should also say, I think I might have mentioned this, but it's Breath by James Nestor. It's the new science of a lost art. And he says, it starts, no matter what you eat, how much you exercise, how skinny or young or strong you are, none of it matters if you're not breathing properly. There is nothing more essential to our health and well-being than breathing. The air in, let out, repeat 25,000 times a day. Yet as a species, humans have lost the ability to breathe correctly, with grave consequences. Journalist James Nestor travels the world to figure out what went wrong and how to fix it. The answers aren't found in pulmonology labs, as we might expect, but in muddy digs of ancient burial sites, secret Soviet facilities, New Jersey choir schools, and the smoggy streets of Sao Paulo. Nestor tracks down men and women exploring the hidden science behind ancient breathing practices like pranayama, Shuddha Sharan Kriya, and Tomo, and teams up with pulmonary tinkerers to scientifically test long-held beliefs about how we breathe. Modern research is showing us that making even slight adjustments to the way we inhale and exhale can jumpstart athletic performance, rejuvenate internal organs, halt snoring, asthma, and autoimmune disease, and even straighten scoliotic spines. None of this should be possible, and yet it is. Drawing on thousands of years of medical texts and recent cutting-edge studies in pulmonology, psychology, biochemistry, and human physiology, Breath turns the conventional wisdom of what we thought we knew about our most basic biological function on its head. You will never breathe the same way again. And let me tell you, this book is like changing my life. I know that sounds like some self-help new age kind of thing of like, oh, I read this book and now like, oh my God, you have to join this cult. I don't want to sound like that, but at the same time, I'm on this journey and I'm sharing it with you guys. I'm on this journey of trying to just try to become the healthiest version of myself. And I'm not saying like, oh, I need to exercise for hours a day and like really restrict what I eat. Like, yeah, I know I need to do those kind of things. And I'm doing baby steps. But with living with my like mental, I don't want to say like mental illnesses, but like, yeah, let's just call it what it is. My mental illnesses and my anxiety, my depression, and, just my like PTSD and stuff. I just want to try to find the most joy in life, and whatever can bring me joy, that's the path that I want to follow, because this world, and especially as we've seen what 2020 is, damn, there's a lot of shit going on, and I don't want to let that destroy me, because it's it kind of has begun. And so I'm really trying to do my best to seek out as much knowledge and have as many experiences as I can. And I hope the same for you. There has to be more to life than what we've known. And especially with stuff like this, where it sounds like some of these stories, they sound so mythical and like magic, like something out of a movie, like a Marvel movie, like Doctor Strange or something like that. Like spines with scoliosis. Let's go that way. Spines with scoliosis. There are people in this book that research and studies have done that they have been able to, like, I don't know about perfectly straight aligned spines, but they've been able to straighten out their spines. And that, how do you explain that? How do you explain that? But there's science to back it up. So again, this isn't just some new age era hippie voodoo shit. Like, no, this is there's evidence to this kind of stuff. Oh, hell no. Who are you calling me? I'm trying to record a podcast. All right. So The author, James Nestor, he went to Greece to write a story on free diving. And these free divers had trained their bodies to go without air for 12 minutes at a time. That's a long time. That's a long ass time. And I Googled before I started recording that the most of us, like us basic humans, us non-superhumans, we can generally hold our breath underwater or just hold our breath for about, I want to say it's like 10 seconds to 2 minutes. 10 seconds to 2 minutes. And they're doing like 12 minutes at a time on holding a single breath. And then they're also diving to depths far beyond what, scientists would think is possible. Most people like you or I, we bail out at about 10 feet underwater after just a few seconds. So, that feeling of like the pressure, there's like pressure in your chest, in your head, your ears start to scream, and then you're like, oh shit, and then you go back up. And that's at 10 feet. And these guys were going to like 100, 200, and even like 300 feet down. Crazy. Literally, it sounds crazy. These freedivers insisted that they weren't special, they weren't superhumans, and they had been previously like most people, like you or I. But their transformation was a matter of training, coaxing the lungs to work harder, to tap the pulmonary capabilities that the rest of us just ignore. Anyone willing with reasonable health could put in hard work and hours, and like they could dive to 100, 200, even 300 feet. And no matter what your age, your weight, your genetic makeup, all one had to do was master the art of breathing. And sorry, I gotta take out this. I love the sleeves. They're beautiful, but then they move around and I'm not playing with that today. So I'm gonna be reading some excerpts from the book. So I hope that that's not like a copyright issue. I'm not reading the book to you, but I was like, I'm not gonna just type up all of this. I'm just gonna go straight to the source. So to the freedivers, breathing wasn't an unconscious act. It wasn't something they just did. It was a force, a medicine, and a mechanism through which they could gain an almost superhuman power. There are as many ways to breathe as there are foods to eat, said one female instructor. And each way we breathe will affect our bodies in different ways. Another diver told me that some methods of breathing will nourish our brains, while others will kill neurons. Some will make us healthy, while others will hasten our death. They told crazy stories about how they breathed in ways that expanded the size of their lungs by 30% or more. They told me about an Indian doctor who lost several pounds by simply changing the way he inhaled, and about another man who was injected with the bacterial endotoxin E. coli, then breathed in a rhythmic pattern to stimulate his immune system and destroy the toxins within minutes. They told me about women who put their cancers into remission, and monks who could melt circles in the snow around their bare bodies over a period of several hours. It all sounded nuts. And honestly, yeah, that all sounds nuts. But, dude, again, there's gotta be magic in this world. And maybe, no, it doesn't mean that I can go like bippity boppity boo and then boom, there's like a giant pumpkin carriage in front of me. No, well, maybe, I don't know. But there's gotta be more. There's just got to be magic and more behind what the fuck we're doing here and like why our bodies work the way that they work, and we're just not functioning properly anymore. And we'll get more into that. Ooh, there she goes again. Left eye twitch. Okay. 7 books of the Chinese Tao dating back to around 400 BCE focused entirely on breathing, how it could kill us or heal us, depending on how we used it. These manuscripts included detailed instructions on how to regulate the breath, slow it, hold it, and swallow it. Even earlier, Hindus considered breath and spirit the same thing and described elaborate practices that are meant to balance breathing and preserve both physical and mental health. Then there are the Buddhists who use breathing not only to lengthen their lives, but to reach higher planes of consciousness. Breathing for all of these people, for all these cultures, was powerful medicine. And that's exactly what we teach in yoga and meditation is it's literally all about the breath. And I've had some psychedelic experiences with the breath. I mean, not as psychedelic as the time that, I took mushrooms or the time that I took acid or the time that I did ayahuasca. No, those were different. But, I've gotten like we call it a yoga high after yoga class. And you just feel so good because your body has taken in, a vast amount more of oxygen. And that's more, fresh blood flowing through your body. And then the body can actually like rejuvenate and heal and restore and all these things. And so, if you can get high off of breathing, that's also free and not toxic to your body, unless you're breathing wrong, then it can be toxic to your body. Here's another interesting thing. There are 27 departments at the National Institutes of Health devoted to lungs, eyes, skin disease, ears, and so on, but the nose and sinuses are not represented in any of them. Weird. That is weird. Which brings us to excerpt number 2. A few scientists were, going out to study breathing, and they discovered that our capacity to breathe has changed through the long processes of human evolution, and that the way we breathe has gotten markedly worse since the dawn of the industrial age. They discovered that 90% of us, very likely you and me, and almost everyone that you know, is breathing incorrectly, and that this failure is either causing or aggravating a laundry list of chronic diseases. On a more inspiring note, some of these researchers were also showing that many modern maladies, asthma, anxiety, attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, psoriasis, and more, could either be reduced or reversed simply by changing the way we inhale and exhale. Interesting stuff. And 40% of today's population suffers from chronic nasal obstruction, and around half of us are habitual mouth breathers, with females and children suffering the most. Not sure why, but it's always great day for us females. Just everything's always going real easy for us. There are many causes, dry air to stress, inflammation to allergies, pollution to pharmaceuticals. But there's a huge finger to point the blame at how over time the human skull has been shrinking. And there's not a lot of real estate. And, we're always evolving. We're always maybe de-evolving. But I found this really interesting. When mouths don't grow wide enough, the roof of the mouth tends to rise up instead of out, forming what's called a V shape or high-arched palate. The upward growth impedes the development of the nasal cavity, shrinking it and disrupting the delicate structures in the nose. The reduced nasal space leads to obstruction and inhibits airflow. Overall, humans had the sad distinction of being the most plugged up species on the earth. We are literally the only ones that have shit like that. Maybe because we're not really from here. I don't know. I'm just throwing theories out there. But getting into how we even became and what is our evolution, a while back, some 4 billion years ago, our earliest ancestors appeared on some rocks. We were small then, a microscopic ball of sludge, and we were hungry. We needed energy to live and proliferate, so we found a way to eat air. The atmosphere was mostly carbon dioxide then, not the best fuel, but it worked well enough. These early versions of us learned to take this gas in, break it down, and spit out what was left, oxygen. For the next billion years, the primordial goo kept doing this, eating more gas, making more sludge, and excreting more oxygen. Then around 2.5 billion years ago, there was enough oxygen waste in the atmosphere that a scavenger ancestor emerged to make use of it. A little rebel, a little rebel piece of goo. It learned to gulp in all that leftover oxygen and excrete carbon dioxide, the first cycle of aerobic life. Oxygen, it turned out, produced 16 times more energy than carbon dioxide. Aerobic life forms used this boost to evolve, to leave the sludge-covered rocks behind and grow larger and more complex. They crawled up to land, dove deep into the sea, and flew into the air. They became plants, trees, birds, bees, and the earliest mammals. Mammals grew noses to warm and purify the air, throats to guide air into lungs, and a network of sacs that would remove oxygen from the atmosphere and transfer it into the blood. The aerobic cells that once clung to swampy rocks so many eons ago now made up the tissues in mammalian bodies. These cells took oxygen from our blood and returned carbon dioxide, which traveled back through the veins, through the lungs, and into the atmosphere, the process of breathing. The ability to breathe so efficiently in a wide variety of ways, consciously and unconsciously, fast and slow, and not at all, allowed our mammal ancestors to catch prey, escape predators, and adapt to different environments. It was all going so well until about 1.5 million years ago, when the pathways through which we took in and exhaled air began to shift and fissure. It was a shift that, much later in history, would affect the breathing of every person on Earth. I've been feeling these cracks for much of my life, and chances are you have too. Stuffy noses, snoring, some degree of wheezing, asthma, allergies, and the rest. I'd always thought they were a normal part of being human. Nearly everyone I knew suffered from one problem or another. But I came to learn that these problems didn't randomly develop. Something caused them, and the answers could be found in a common and homely human trait. I'm going to be doing a lot of reading. This is a lot of reading. I'm sorry. It's just, I'm only going to go through a couple of these. It's just fascinating, and I'm so excited to share it with you. Because I didn't fucking know any of this, really, so maybe you didn't either. So this next little excerpt is about like the ancient skulls versus our modern skulls. And remember, like the real estate, there's not a lot of room. Our skulls are kind of shrinking the more that we're evolving, or maybe like disevolving. So these ancient skulls, they all had these enormous forward-facing jaws. They had expansive sinus cavities and broad mouths. And bizarrely, even though none of the ancient people ever flossed or brushed or saw a dentist, they all had straight teeth. The forward facial growth and large mouths also created wider airways. These people very likely never snored or had any sleep apnea or sinusitis or any other chronic respiratory problems that affect modern populations. They did not because they could not. Their skulls were far too large and their airways too wide for anything to block them. They breathed easy. Nearly all ancient humans shared this forward structure, shared this forward structure, but everywhere around the world. This remained true from the time when the Homo sapiens first appeared, some 300,000 years ago, some 3,000 years ago, 300,000 years ago to just a few hundred years ago. Reading, it's fun. But now with modern skulls, they're finding that the chins had recessed behind the foreheads, jaws were slumped back, and sinuses shrunken. All the modern skulls showed some degree of crooked teeth. Of the 5,400 different species of mammals on the planet, humans are now the only ones to routinely have misaligned jaws, overbites, underbites, and snaggled teeth, a condition formerly called malocclusion. So then this, evokes the question of why would we evolve to make ourselves sick? And, it all happens because we were from literally the time that we stood up on our hind legs. Sorry, my microphone is slumping down, so I'm using my leg to just prop it up. Work smarter, not harder. But from the first, what is it? The Homo habilis. That's the first human ancestor from 1.7 million years ago. But, they developed thumbs and fingers. And so then they were starting to do that. And with their what is it called? Opposable thumb. If I just do this, if I just move my thumb around enough, I'll come up with what the word is. Come on, Tay. But so they got the opposable thumb, which meant that they could then create, they could use tools to kill animals and cut the flesh away. And so eating the raw diet, that took a lot of time and effort. So then they gathered stones and then they bashed, I know, it sounds Neanderthal, but it kind of is. So then they gathered stones and they bashed prey against rocks. This tenderized food, and so when you tenderize food, it spared us from some of the effort of digesting and chewing, which saved energy. With that extra energy, we were able to grow larger brains. And then grilling food was even better. And around 800,000 years ago, we began processing food on fire, which released an enormous amount of additional calories. So our large intestines, that helped break down, rough and fibrous fruits and vegetables. And so that would shrink down considerably under the new diet. And that alone saved even more energy. So in order to save all of this energy, everything was just getting a little bit smaller, right? And then the more modern ancestors, Homo erectus, they used it to grow an even bigger brain, an astonishing 50% larger than those of the habilis ancestors. This is when we began to look less like apes and more like people, what we understand as people. And then the innovation of mashing and cooking the food, that had consequences. Of course, we were making things easier for ourselves, but then what was happening is the quickly growing brain needed space to stretch out. And so then it took out from the front of our faces, home to the sinuses, mouths, and airways. And then over time, muscles at the center of the face loosened and the bones in the jaw weakened and grew thinner. The face shortened and the mouth shrank, leaving behind a bony protuberance that replaced the squashed snout of our ancestors. This new feature was ours alone and distinguished us from other primates, the protruding nose. But the problem with that is that it's smaller and the vertically positioned nose was less efficient at filtering air and exposed us to more airborne pathogens and bacteria. The smaller sinuses and mouth also reduced space in our throats. The more we cooked, the more soft, calorie-rich food we consumed, the larger our brains grew, and the tighter our airways became. Oh, and then it goes into even more and more about the Neanderthals, and then then we get to the Naledi and the Heidelbergensis, and where was I going with that? Tay, where are you going with that? So strangely, sadly, the same adaptations that would allow our ancestors to outwit, outmaneuver, and outlive other animals, a mastery of fire and processing food, an enormous brain, and the ability to communicate in a vast range of sounds, would obstruct our mouths and throats and make it much harder for us to breathe. This recessed growth would much later make us prone to choke on our own bodies when we slept. And that means snoring. And none of this mattered to early humans, of course. For tens of thousands of years, our ancestors would use their widely developed heads to breathe just fine. Armed with a nose, a voice, and a supersized brain, humans took over the world. And that we did. We definitely did that. But then he goes into studies with scientists and researchers that did, if you see somebody running and they're breathing in and out of their mouth, well, you'd think like, oh, I'm getting more air intake, I'm getting more oxygen, and I guess you're actually not. You are not absorbing as much oxygen as you should be, and he goes into depth of that. I'm not gonna try to give a lecture here because we all know how that would go, and this is already about 50 minutes, I don't know, almost an hour long episode, so I'm gonna paraphrase. But he did a study where people were on bicycles, like a stationary bike, and they had to do, so much time on the bike, only breathing in and out through the mouth. And then they would check their vitals and check their oxygen intake. And I guess what happens is it just puts way more stress on your body when you're breathing that way. So then, because your body's stressed out, it's working harder, so then you have to work harder. But then he did the study where they switched it. They did, X amount of time on the bike with breathing only in and out through the nose. And I guess they went, here's a little excerpt. Simply training yourself to breathe through your nose could cut total exertion in half and offer huge gains in endurance. The athletes felt invigorated while nasal breathing rather than exhausted. They all swore off breathing through their mouths ever again. So they were able to work more efficiently with using less energy and not feeling exerted afterwards. Instead, they felt invigorated. And that is how you should feel after you're exercising. Especially, if you're not breathing right and you're exercising, you are not getting enough oxygen to your muscles. And then, you're going to get those muscle cramps. And it's not good for anything. Oh, this was really interesting. Mouth breathing, it turns out, changes the physical body and transforms airways for all the worse. Inhaling air through the mouth decreases pressure, which causes the soft tissues in the back of the mouth to become loose and flex inward, creating less overall space and making breathing more difficult. Mouth breathing begets more mouth breathing. Inhaling from the nose has the opposite effect. It forces air against all those flabby tissues at the back of the throat, creating the airways wider and breathing easier. After a while, these tissues and muscles get toned and to stay in this opened and wide position. Nasal breathing begets more nasal breathing. Sleeping with an open mouth exacerbates these problems. Whenever we put our heads on a pillow, gravity pulls the soft tissues in the throat and tongue down, closing off the airway even more. After a while, our airways get conditioned to this position. Snoring and sleep apnea become the new normal. And sleep apnea is scary. Like, people can die from that. Oh, I know I have to change the SD card again. Oh, it's that time. Too long of an episode, Tay. Too long of an episode. I mean, who am I kidding? Joe Rogan does like 3 fucking hours on an episode. Again, I just find this shit so fascinating. And I love watching and listening to other people when, they're talking about stuff that fascinates them. And I hope that you're enjoying this, because I am. Except I don't have my fan on or the AC. And let me tell you, it's hot up in here. Okay. So getting back to snoring and sleep apnea. There are several books that describe the horrendous health effects of snoring and sleep apnea. They explain how these afflictions led to bedwetting, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, diabetes, high blood pressure, cancer, and so on. I'd read a report from the Mayo Clinic which found that chronic insomnia, long assumed to be a psychological problem, was often a breathing problem. The millions of Americans who have a chronic insomnia disorder and who are right now, like me, staring out bedroom windows or at TVs, phones, or ceilings can't sleep because they can't breathe. And contrary to what most of us might think, no amount of snoring is normal, and no amount of sleep apnea comes without risk of serious health effects. A sleep researcher at Stanford found that children who experienced no apnea events at all, only heavy breathing and light snoring, or increased respiratory effort, could suffer from mood disorders, blood pressure derangements, learning disabilities, and more. Mouth breathing was also making me dumber. A recent Japanese study showed how rats who had their nostrils obstructed and were forced to breathe through their mouths developed fewer brain cells and took twice as long to make their way through a maze than nasal breathing controls. Another Japanese study in humans from 2013 found that mouth breathing delivered a disturbance of oxygen to the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain associated with ADHD. Nasal breathing had no such effects. The ancient Chinese were onto it as well. Quote, the breath inhaled through the mouth is called nichai, if I'm pronouncing that right, adverse breath, which is extremely harmful, unquote, states a passage from the Tao. Quote, be careful not to have the breath inhaled through the mouth, unquote. So don't breathe in and out through your mouth. Don't do it. He actually, again, he's like, I know this sounds crazy, but he sleeps with a tiny, it's like, he said it's the size of a stamp. And it's just like your basic Scotch tape, you know, like the clear tape. You don't put a giant thing of duct tape on your mouth. Don't kill yourself when you're sleeping, you know. But it's just a tiny little piece of Scotch tape right on your lip, so the top lip, bottom lip, right in the center. And, you know, if you cough in the middle of the night, air can escape. And he's like, it changed his life. It literally changed his life, along with, you know, these breathing techniques and doing certain exercises and stuff. But he's like, his mouth doesn't drop open when he's sleeping, and then he doesn't have to worry about snoring or sleep apnea, or just, you know, the bad consequences of breathing in and out through your mouth. So I'm going to try it, and I'll let you know. I know it sounds crazy. It sounds crazy, but hey, all the best things are crazy. So, I should have like little keyboard that could play something while I'm trying to look at what I want to tell you next. Because I have so many notes. Okay. Found it. The magic of the nose and its healing powers wasn't lost on the ancients. I love like ancient philosophy, ancient medicines, like just ancient living. I'm so fascinated by it. Around 1500 BCE, the Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical texts ever discovered, offered a description of how nostrils were supposed to feed air to the heart and lungs, not the mouth. 1,000 years later, Genesis 2:7 described how, quote, the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils with the breath of life, and the man became a living soul, unquote. I don't know why I had to say it like that, but I just kind of felt like I had to. A Chinese Taoist text from the 8th century AD noted that the nose was the, quote, heavenly door, and that the breath must be taken in through it. Never do otherwise, the text warned, for breath would be in danger and illness would set in. But it wasn't until the 19th century that the Western population ever considered the glories of nasal breathing. It happened thanks to an adventurous artist and a researcher named George Catlin. And he goes into, you know, about Catlin, but just a little excerpt about Catlin. Like he pretty much sold his life, all of his belongings, everything. And he was like, I'm going to go travel the country, and I'm going to document the lives of 50 Native American tribes. And Caitlin marveled at the fact that all 50 tribes seemed to share the same superhuman physical characteristics. In some groups, such as the Crow and the Osage, Caitlin wrote that there were few men at their full growth who are less than 6 feet in stature, and very many of them 6.5 and others 7 feet. That's tall. They all seemed to share a Herculean make of broad shoulders and barrel chests. The women were nearly as tall and just as striking. Having never seen a dentist or a doctor, the tribal people had their teeth that were perfectly straight, as regular as keys of a piano, Caitlin noted. Nobody seemed to get sick, and deformities and other chronic health problems appeared rare and non-existent. The tribes attributed their vigorous health to a medicine, what Caitlin called the great secret of life. The secret was breathing. The Native Americans explained to Caitlin that breath inhaled through the mouth sapped the body of strength, deformed the face, and caused stress and disease. On the other hand, breath inhaled through the nose kept the body strong, made the face beautiful, and prevented disease. The air which enters the lungs is different from that which enters the nostrils, as distilled water is different from the water in an ordinary cistern or a frog pond. And then he talks about how the mothers of the tribe would, because they have these babies, and you want to make sure that they're breathing properly. And how do you teach a child? They don't understand words yet. They don't understand anything yet. So with the babies, if they saw the mouths open, they would just take their fingers and boop, just a little lift up, close that mouth. What would they do? Yeah, they would just carefully close the baby's lips after feeding, and at night they'd stand over the infants and gently pinch their mouths shut if they were breathing. And, mama's got to do what mama's got to do. And yeah, then you just teach them while they're young, and you teach them how to breathe properly. And I just think it's fascinating that globally, all these different tribes that, maybe across from the globe of one another, they had no idea of one another. They all had the same understanding of, bitch, you better not breathe through your mouth, or else you're going to be dumb, and you can't. Survival of the fittest over here. Sorry, I have to fix my mic. Nope, she just keeps moving. Fun. Technology is fun, guys. I talked about the diaphragm breathing. So a typical adult engages as little as 10% of the range of the diaphragm when breathing, which overburdens the heart, elevates blood pressure, and causes a rash of circulatory problems. Extending those breaths to 50 to 70% of the diaphragm's capacity will ease cardiovascular stress and allow the body to work more efficiently. For this reason, the diaphragm is sometimes referred to as the second heart. Because it not only beats to its own rhythm, but it also affects the rate and strength of the heartbeat. And that's what that's why we recommend going to yoga or doing a meditation practice and focusing on your breath. Why do you think, if you've taken my classes or if you've taken any class, why are your teachers always telling you to breathe? And you're like, duh, bitch, of course I'm breathing. Because you're not breathing. Because I see you and you're holding your breath. Because I know I do it. And you're like, or you're forcing it. You're like in warrior position. You're like, and it's like, bitch, calm down. Slow, methodical breaths, and there's a reason to it. Just like you said, it calms you down. It literally has a physiological effect on you. And if you have high blood pressure, get your ass to a yoga class. Maybe not right now because, we're dealing with the pandy. Oh God, there goes the mic again. All right. Drink or take a hit every time that my eye twitches. And then also every time that the mic moves. You're going to have a fun time. with this episode. Yeah, they're athletes are advancing because they can go longer and harder without actually having to work harder. Again, work smarter, not harder. But I found this very interesting for anyone who is interested in like the religious world or just cultural worlds, in general. He says that there's another name for slow breathing, prayer. When Buddhist monks chant their most popular mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, each spoken phrase lasts 6 seconds, with 6 seconds to inhale before the chant starts again. The traditional chant of Om, the sacred sound of the universe, takes 6 seconds to sing, with a pause of about 6 seconds to inhale. The Satanama chant, one of the best-known techniques in Kundalini Yoga, also takes 6 seconds to vocalize, followed by 6 seconds to inhale. Then there are the ancient Hindu hand and tongue poses called mudras, a technique called kachari, intended to help boost physical and spiritual health and overcome disease. Involves placing the tongue above the soft palate so that it's pointed toward the nasal cavity. From my teaching, we call that like fire point. The deep, slow breaths taken during this kachari each takes 6 seconds. Japanese, African, Hawaiian, Native American, Buddhist, Taoist, Christian, these cultures and religions all had somehow developed the same prayer techniques, requiring the same breathing patterns, and they all likely benefited from the same calming effect. And then it goes into how like saying the prayers on the rosary, that is like timed out perfectly, which then the Hindu, like the malas, which is pretty much just like the Hindu rosary, that's the same length of time. It's just, I'm fascinated when it's like this global thing where how did they all know? How did they all know? Maybe it was the aliens. Maybe they were flying around and they were like, hey, yo, this is how you live correctly. And then they fly to the other place and they're like, hey, we're here to show you techniques and, drop some knowledge on you. Who knows? But again, there's so much more that I had. If you can see, I have a bunch of like notes taken and I have so much more that I want to tell you, but I've shared a lot, and I just feel it would be best if you read the book. I'm not getting any sponsorship from this. I'm not getting any money from this. So it's not like I'm just trying to be like, hey, get this book and give me some money. It's really interesting. No, it's something that's literally changing my life, and it's bringing more joy and happiness into my life. And hey, if maybe that will work for you. And like I say in pretty much every episode, if we can all just learn to calm down, to get along with each other, create some peace on earth, and again, just chill out. And maybe my microphone and maybe my eye will just chill out if I can just breathe a little bit better. But yeah, it sounds like a Marvel movie. It sounds crazy. It sounds out there, but shit's backed by science. There's there's a bunch of sources in the back. There's a whole notes part. There's a what is it? Not an encyclopedia, but something like that. There's an index. There's there's sources, and there's breathing techniques. So you can do that at home and get yourself feeling better. And I will let you know. I'll let you know with the tape. I'll see how that works. That's going to be interesting. Hopefully I don't open my mouth when I'm sleeping and then the tape gets inhaled into my mouth and then stuck in the back of my throat and then I choke and die. See, effects of breathing through your mouth, just not good. But yeah, I thought it was fascinating. People with scoliosis can align their spines out by breathing, or you can lower your blood pressure and like expand your lungs more and make your face more beautiful. That's crazy. But yeah, it's interesting that we are the only species on this planet that has crooked teeth. It's kind of weird. I mean, he did say like, okay, well, if you look at pugs, like look at their teeth. Or my dog growing up was a black lab. He had some crooked teeth, but he was saying in depth in here is like that, at least with the pugs and like dogs, that comes from inbreeding, because pugs' faces are only the way that they are because we were like, hey, let's take this and mix it with that, and we recessed genes so much that, and with inbreeding, that's what happened, and that's what happens when you do inbreeding, and that's not good. That's not good. Yeah, again, just fascinating. I think that's all I keep saying. If I'm not reading a quote from a book, I'm just like, it's just so good. It's just so fascinating. But it really is. And hey, if you're bored right now during the pandy, pick up a good book and get lost in that shit. But I said this in an Instagram post, and link in the description. Follow me. Let's chat. But breath has become such an important piece of 2020. You know, there is a virus that attacks the lungs and suffocates its victims, or there is a horrendous pressure of the system's knee on the neck of those unrightfully oppressed. And, you know, we all need to get our breath back, take our breath back and take our power back, become the best versions of ourselves, so that way our cups are filled, and then we can begin to pour our overflow and abundance into others who, you know, maybe don't have too full of a cup. And then we can help change the world. I know. Always ending with that, like, let's save the world. But honestly, can we save the world? Because I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. Where are the aliens? When are they going to be like, guys? I don't know. Maybe around November. Maybe we'll see some aliens around then. You know, especially if the election just, whoo. All right, I'm going to go do some breathing techniques. Thank you so much for listening to this, for hanging out with me today, for love and support, and just keep breathing, my friends, and I will see you next time. All right, peace.